What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. We're going my core plays for week 8 of the NFL season on DraftKings and FanDuel. If you do enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's get right into it. And as always, if you're ever interested in anything you see on the screen behind me, it's available completely free for a week over on my Patreon if you want to check it out. No strings attached. If you like it, you can stay. If not, tell me to kick rocks. I don't care either way, but it's got projections, my optimizer, which we will run at the end of this video as a preview to see who is popping with the projections that I have in place. Cheat sheet going over cash games, tournaments, my Discord community. I do cover other sports as well, including the NBA every single day and these last couple NASCAR races. So if you want to check it out, links down below in the description or the pinned comment. I'd love to have you come on over. Anyway, let's get into it here. Not a long list of the quarterback position this week for me. There is a couple that I left off that I think are somewhat viable, but I try to trim it down as much as possible. So for me this weekend, I'm spending up at the quarterback position. And I don't do this every single week, but with the way this roster construction sets up this week and my projections, it's just leading me to these expensive quarterback builds. There is one mid-range / cheap guy that I do like in CJ Stroud because of the matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, and the stacks are extremely easy to make in that game. But other than that, I will be spending up, but it's really not that hard to do this weekend, even with their expensive pairing options. So let's start up top here with the man, the running MVP, Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs, $8,400 on DraftKings, 9 flat over on FanDuel, fresh off a week where he threw for over 400 yards and multiple passing touchdowns versus the Chargers defense, which has been Swiss cheese so far this season. But another Swiss cheese matchup here versus the Denver Broncos. They have been atrocious versus the run. Not that great versus the pass either. 27.5 implied team total for the Chiefs on the road in Mile High, which is the second highest total of the week, only behind Tua and the Miami Dolphins. They're 7.5-point favorites on the season. Mahomes at nearly 300 passing yards per game, over 2 passing touchdowns, throwing the ball nearly 36 times per game with a 70% completion percentage. And Mahomes has actually kind of been sneaky as a rusher this year. He's averaging 30 rushing yards per game, which is only 9 behind Jalen Hurts. Now, he doesn't offer near the rushing touchdown upside. He actually has 0 on the season because Jalen Hurts will get the goal line carries, which makes him a super safe play every single week. But Mahomes is giving you about 3 points on the ground every single week, which is a nice little bonus. And the Broncos are currently allowing the 4th most points per game to quarterbacks, 270 yards, 2.3 passing touchdowns. I have Mahomes projected as my highest quarterback of the week at 24.34 points. Jalen Hurts is like right there with him at 24.25. So really just a bit of a coin flip there. He's a little bit cheaper. So point per dollar wise, he looks a little bit better, but both incredibly elite options. In Mahomes, I think he's fine for cash games or tournaments. But for me personally, I would rather go with either Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson in cash this week, just because you get more rushing upside, more rushing touchdown upside. So the floor is a little bit safer. Plus, I love Isaiah Pacheco, who we'll talk about in a little bit. And I don't absolutely love playing Mahomes and Pacheco together, especially in cash games. So I think he's better reserved for tournaments this weekend. But speaking of Jalen Hurts, $8,200, he is one of the safest plays week in, week out with the rushing upside that he offers you. Nearly 40 rushing yards per game, which is a built-in passing touchdown floor, plus 0.86 rushing touchdowns per game, which is nearly like right around 5-6 points since it's not a full rushing touchdown per game. So that's just about 10 points on the ground that you're going to get every single week with Jalen Hurts on average, plus whatever he does through the air, which so far this season, Jalen Hurts has been honestly pretty good. 68% completion percentage, 260 passing yards per game, and 1.3 passing touchdowns. A.J. Brown's an absolute beast out there. He has Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, DeAndre Swift out of the backfield, so there's no shortage of weapons for Jalen Hurts. And it's a great matchup versus the Commanders, who are allowing the 3rd most points per game to quarterbacks. So fire up Jalen Hurts. He's one of my favorite options of the entire week. And if you don't go with the 2 that we just talked about, Lamar Jackson, $8,100. Monster game versus the Detroit Lions last week. 27-point implied team total, which is only half a point off Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. They come in as 9.5-point favorites on the road in Arizona, but no other to worry about. We're in a dome, so I do like that. 230 passing yards per game, over 1 passing touchdown, 8 yards per attempt, 71% completion percentage, and 50 rushing yards per game on 0.7 rushing touchdowns per game for Lamar Jackson. Plus the Cardinals allowing the 5th most points per game to quarterbacks, and the stacks are incredibly easy in this game. Use Lamar, pair him up as Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, run it back with a guy like Marquise Brown, Trey McBride, even Michael Wilson, all extremely cheap this week. So even though Lamar is expensive, the rest of the stack isn't, so it really balances out your lineup. And if you are going cheap, CJ Stroud, the stacking options are very cheap here with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, run it back with a guy like Adam Thielen, who's still in the mid 6K range. Another guy to easily stack up this week, and he's averaging like 280 passing yards per game despite the really low completion percentage. And moving over to our build here, I did Lamar Jackson earlier in the week for my first look video, so to not be redundant, we're going to go with a different option, even though I love Lamar this week. And let's roll out Jalen Hurts. I have not yet done a Jalen Hurts build yet this season, so it'll be something new. And moving on to running backs, personally for me, I don't see myself spending up for CMC this week. Not saying he's a bad play, and if you're wondering why he's not on here, it's just because I feel like I'm going to go mid-range this week, especially since I'm spending up at the quarterback position. But if you do have the money for him, it's never a bad thing to play CMC with his volume and involvement in the passing game. But up top here, Raheem Mostert at $7,700, going to be really tough to get over on FanDuel considering he's $9,000. This is a great spot, and he already played the Patriots this year, and he had a monster game, over 120 yards, got into the end zone, and he's coming off a pretty poor performance versus the Philadelphia Eagles, so people are just game log watching. Usually someone busts, especially if it was a showdown slate, which it was, and obviously everyone was pretty high on Raheem Mostert because of how well he's done so far this year, coming off a monster game. No, didn't really give you that performance, but he has been incredible on the ground this season, just under 6 yards per carry, 12 attempts per game, 70 yards, and involvement in the passing game. The New England Patriots on the season, while they're not my favorite defense to target in all aspects, they're still bottom half of the league when it comes to the running back position, ranking 19th, and they do give it up a little bit in the passing game as well. And the Miami Dolphins come in as a 9.5 point favorite at home, 28 point implied team total, which is the highest of the entire week. So this is definitely a really solid week for Mostert over on DraftKings FanDuel. Going to be a bit tougher to fit in over there. Alvin Kamara, $7,300 with how involved he is in the passing game in this offense. They basically run the ball through Alvin Kamara dump-offs, and that is an incredible thing over on DraftKings because you have PPR scoring. It's not going to be as valuable over on FanDuel, but it's still going to be where he's viable on both sides, but more so on DraftKings. Like if you're looking at his sample size this year, it's going to be a little bit lower, but the volume that he's getting through the air so far, like I said, in limited time, 9.75 targets per game, 8.75 catches, 23.5% target share, a 34% weighted opportunity share. He's also getting a ton of work on the ground as well, over 15 carries per game. And the Colts are currently ranking 27 versus running backs. And if Derek Carr is just going to be captain dump off and give it to Kamara 10 plus times through the air and getting 15 plus carries, you will take that volume all day in a plus matchup. Then we have volume god Travis Etienne here at $7,200. Pretty decent matchup versus Pittsburgh. They're 21st versus running backs this season, but this is mainly a volume play on an offense that should be able to put up some points here. Only 21.5 implied team total, but if it's not Trevor Lawrence getting touchdowns through the air, Travis Etienne is more than likely going to find the end zone. 1 touchdown per game this year, 30 receiving yards on 4 targets, 11.5% target share, plus 18 carries on the ground per game. If we're going to get 20 opportunities from a running back as talented as Travis Etienne and a pretty decent offense, even though Calvin really does have his struggles at time, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I think Etienne is a fine volume play, but another tough fit over on FanDuel, nearly $9,000. So I'll probably try to save a little bit of money and look at these lower tier backs on DraftKings and also over on FanDuel this week on both sites. DeAndre Swift at $6,300. While he's not my preferred pairing option with Jalen Hurts, I don't think you can rule it out. Is seeing over 4 targets per game, so there is involvement there. But with Jalen Hurts, I know we always talk about how we have to have 2 pass catchers with our quarterback. I'm going to do it for this video, but I don't think you have to do it with a mobile quarterback like that because he can do it by himself, and you're not relying on, like if you play Matthew Stafford, he's not going to get you 70 yards on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns. He has to be paired with other guys because if he's going to go off, that means at least 2 of his pass catching options went off as well. But Swift finds himself in a really good matchup versus Washington. He's a 7-point favorite, 25.25 implied team total. Has been efficient this season, over 5 yards per carry. If we're going to see around 5 targets and 15 carries, that is elite usage and a really good offense with a good offensive line. Jonathan Taylor has seen his snaps increasing. We know Zach Moss is a bit banged up. If he happened to miss by chance, Taylor would basically be locked in for 20 plus touches. Now, it's not a great matchup. New Orleans is currently ranking 3rd versus opposing running backs, not allowing too many points per game whatsoever. But if we can get 20 plus touches with a guy like Taylor, I think that would have to have some interest. Plus, he'll get involvement in the passing game as well. Isaiah Pacheco, $6,100. He is one of my favorite running backs of the entire week. He pretty much checks every single box besides being a home favorite. He just happens to be a road favorite, but a 27.5 implied team total, which is second highest of the week. 7.5 point favorites, and on the season, over 4 yards per carry, nearly 15 carries per game. In the past 2 weeks, we have seen 10 targets. That is awesome. Usually that's Jerick McKinnon's role. If we're going to see Isaiah Pacheco in a pass catching role in this offense where he sees a handful of targets each and every single week, that is so valuable, especially at $6,100, one of the best offenses in the NFL. Plus this matchup, it's just insane. They're allowing 38.4 points per game specifically to running backs, which is the most in the league, over 140 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 55 yards, nearly 7 catches, and 0.57 receiving touchdowns. Fire up Isaiah Pacheco. And I don't know why he's this cheap. At some point, he's going to start getting more expensive, but you cannot pass this up, especially in cash games and even in tournaments. I like him just all aspects this week. The only way he busts is if you just get that random Jerick McKinnon 2 receiving touchdown game, which we hope doesn't happen here. And then Breece Hall at $5,900. Good spot versus the New York Giants. They're currently ranking bottom half in the league when it comes to running backs this season, ranking 22nd, but well over 100 rushing yards per game. 1 rushing touchdown, not giving up too much to the air, but In a very limited sample size, Breece Hall is averaging nearly 6.5 yards per carry this season. And since Dalvin Cook is pretty much phased out at this point, which thank goodness, that dude is beyond washed, we get 15, 20 opportunities from Breece Hall. This price tag is way too cheap in this matchup. And moving back over to our build here, like I said, I'm probably going to save a little bit of money at the running back position this week since I'm spending up for Jalen Hurts. And for tournaments, I'm probably just going to have to pair him up with AJ Brown. So we're eating up about $16,000 total there because I think AJ, yeah, he's already at $8,000 and Hurts is 82. So yeah, $16,200 right there. Let's scroll down a little bit. Love Alvin Kamara, but probably need to save a little bit more money for this specific build. So we're just going to plug in Isaiah Pacheco and Breece Hall. I realize this is going to be a very popular combination, but it is what it is, deal with it. Moving on to our pass catchers, like I always say, try to keep this as simple. There's always going to be a long list every single week of excellent options you can pick from, but it's all tied to your quarterback and the main stack that you're rolling with. So I have Jalen Hurts, so I am directly looking at guys like Devontae Smith, AJ Brown. Now, Devontae Smith hasn't exactly been my most favorite option to use this year. The volume is there, but the production really hasn't been as much. That's one of the two spots that's already locked into my lineup. Now with Jalen Hurts, he does have a pretty strong tight end in Dallas Goedert, so he's another option as well. But just going through the list here, if you have Tua, you're married to Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is fine as a one-off for cash games this week, but personally, I don't really see myself spending up too much at the wide receiver position. AJ Brown would be my favorite stud of the week based off his price tag and just what we've seen so far, like the past month or so now. The dude's been an absolute beast, over 100 yards every single week. So since I have Jalen Hurts, I will be playing AJ Brown in this build, but even as cash games or a one-off, I think Brown is fine. Devontae Smith's a tournament option. He would be my second stacking option there. He's seen 7 targets per game this year on a 22% target share, but only 4.5 catches and 54 receiving yards. Would like to see a little bit more upside out of Devontae Smith, but we know the talent's there. The opportunity's there. At some point, I'm sure he's going to start turning out some solid games. Adam Thielen, I think, is one of the better cash plays on the slate over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, the price has caught up. He is nearly $9,000, but on DK, he's still cheap enough for the volume that he's getting, where he's 100% viable, and he would be a key part of that Houston-Carolina game if you're stacking that one up. Chris Olave is fine as a one-off this week. We know the opportunity has been there. The production, really not so as much. Tons of air yards this year. He's right behind AJ Brown, looking at the chart that I have right now. 15.1 on the ADOT. 9.5 targets, but only 5.5 catches per game and 67 receiving yards. Also not finding the end zone too much. I think a lot of that is to blame with Derek Carr, but it's not like it's a new situation this week. It's still Derek Carr, so I feel like we're going to get similar results, but really nice matchup versus Indianapolis Colts. Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley. I don't have Trevor Lawrence on here, but I like a lot of the Jaguars, so maybe I probably should have Trevor Lawrence, at least in the quarterback pool. I don't love being on the road in Pittsburgh, but it's a pretty easy matchup for the wide receivers. Steelers have been getting shredded by them this season. I know they kind of locked down Cooper Kupp, but Puka Nacua still had a big game. They're allowing the third most points per game to wide receivers with over 200 receiving yards per game on the season. Ridley has been extremely hit or miss. Christian Kirk way more consistent, so I'd prefer Kirk over Ridley, but if you are playing tournaments, Ridley does have that big upside. Jordan Addison, monster game versus the 49ers on Monday Night Football. Still no Justin Jefferson, so he's going to be in that number one role. And while I prefer Kirk Cousins at home, the opportunity should still be there for Jordan Addison this week. Zay Flowers is one of the better cash game options this week, especially if you have Lamar Jackson in tournaments. You pretty much have to pair the two together. 7.5 targets per game on nearly a 30% target share. George Pickens and Deontay Johnson both going to be viable. Pickens had 18 points last week. Deontay Johnson still had some volume there. He comes in at only $5,000. Pretty easy matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I believe he did pop up on the injury report, but assuming he is going to be good to go, $5,000 is too cheap in my opinion for a guy that should see 6 to 8 targets in this game, with upside of more. Nico Collins at $5,500 and Tank Dell at $4,900. If you are using CJ Stroud this week, he'd be the two main options. Robert Woods, I believe, is not expected to play at this point. You do have Noah Brown who returned, so it's not like it's just going to be just those two alone, but they are the two main options there. Nico Collins has been great this year, just under 100 yards per game on 7 targets, and Tank Dell, while he has missed some time, still seeing nearly 6 targets per game, 69% target share, but we know he has big play upside. We have seen it before. Marquise Brown, an excellent run back option if you are doing a Baltimore Ravens stack. Looks like we're still going to have another week of Josh Dobbs, even though Kyler Reddy looks like he is ready and practicing, but still a 28% target share in that offense. They will be trailing 9.5 point dogs. Not the absolute best matchup in the world, but the opportunity will be there. Terry McLaurin in Philadelphia Eagles stacks. He's looking like the main run back option here. Not really a big fan of Brian Robinson or Antonio Gibson. Logan Thomas would be okay, but I do have other tight end preferences this week. So you're pretty much left with Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Curtis Samuel, I guess. So McLaurin would definitely be the number one option here. $5,300, 7.5 targets per game, 24.5% target share. And it's actually a really nice matchup versus the Eagles, who are currently allowing the second most points per game in the wide receiver position. I'm not sure if that's hard to believe, but I didn't realize they were that far down. So this is a pretty good matchup for how and McLaurin here. Not really any interest in Howell this week, but McLaurin specifically is in a really good spot. And that pretty much covers everybody. Kendrick Bourne down there at $4,700. I guess Jalen Ramsey is going to be back, so that does, I would say that hurts the overall wide receiver position for the New England Patriots, because on the season, Miami really hasn't been that great versus receivers, currently ranking 24th, but I'm sure Jalen Ramsey will help that out. But the volume should be there for Bourne. He's had some decent touchdown upside this season as well, 20% target share and a 25% market share of the team's air yards as well. Moving back over to our build, like I said, we're pretty much locked in with A.J. Brown here. And just to show you guys how much of a monster he has been recently. 14, 13, 8, 9, 15 targets, 25, 41, 21, 23, and 32 points. So yeah, loving A.J. Brown. Feel very confident versus the Commanders here. Then my main run back option, like I said, Terry McLaurin is going to be the number one option here. So $5,300, we'll plug him in. And since I am not 100% sure if I'm going to use Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert, as of right now, I'm leaning Goddard. We'll leave the wide receiver 3 spot open. And usually not the exciting part, tight ends and defenses, but honestly, the tight ends this week are kind of deep. So you have your big 3 up top with Kelsey, Andrews, and Hawkinson. And honestly, Kelsey's on his own different tier than everybody else. Looking up their target numbers, I mean, just as you can see, Kelsey just dominates the tight end position. 27% target share, 30% market share of team's air yards. 10 targets, 8 catches. The dude's an absolute animal out there. If you're playing Mahomes, I would highly recommend playing Travis Kelsey with him, because he is the main option that you can count on every single week. With Lamar, play Mark Andrews. Not quite on Travis Kelsey's level, but he has tons of upside as well. TJ Hawkinson with no Justin Jefferson. He's just going to get peppered with targets, over 8 targets per game this season. Then after that, we get a little bit cheaper. So we have our mid-tier with Dallas Goedert, Evan Ingram. I think both are fine plays. Since I have Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert makes more sense here. He doesn't see quite the targets as Evan Ingram or these other guys we talked about, but I do like the upside. And it's another good spot just overall for the Eagles versus Commanders in general. So I like Goddard. He's probably going to make our lineup here because he's a little bit cheaper than Devontae Smith. Evan Ingram's fine as a one-off option. Do like everybody versus Pittsburgh here. Then Jake Ferguson and Trey McBride if you were going cheap. I like Ferguson because of the targets and his route participation in this offense. I think he's actually a nice buy low candidate, or if you can pick him up on waivers, do that in fantasy football this week. Then Trey McBride, Zach Ertz is on the IR, and this team uses the tight end position. We have seen Trey McBride's role increase the previous 2 weeks. Now that he's pretty much the only main guy here, if we can get 5+ targets at $2,800, he's a fine run back option in Baltimore stacks. If you go double tight end, you can put him in the flex spot, or if you abide by going the Mark Andrews route, you can plug him in the tight end spot, or for cash games, I think he's fine as well, just to try to give yourself some extra salary. Then same old thing with defenses. Let's scroll down and try to find the first one, Vegas implied total-wise, that looks halfway decent here. None of these ones really have any interest to me. The Vikings versus Green Bay, I don't mind. We know Jordan Love is not the best quarterback out there. I got them projected for 6.5 points. But the one defense that's really popping out for me is the Falcons. And they've actually had a pretty solid defense this year. 35.5 point over-under, which is the lowest on the entire week. 16.5 implied team total against them. They're 2.5 point favorites. They're not playing at home, but I got them projected for 8.64 points, and it looks like they're going to be going up against Will Levis, who it's going to be his first start, and I'm not really scared of that Tennessee defense either, so the Falcons look like the pretty much best option to go with this week. And then outside of that, not really too interested in any other one. Just pick a random one that fits if you have the money, but honestly, the Falcons look like the number one option. Seahawks versus PJ Walker at home would also make some sense. 17 point implied team total. So at least projection-wise, Falcons and Seahawks look the best. So moving back over to our build here, I'm actually kind of concerned that we're not going to have the money to do the lineup that I want. So if we plug in Dallas Goedert here for the double stack, we're only left with under $4,000, which if we just plug in a random defense, I guess not so random. I do like the Falcons a lot this week. That leaves us with $4,500 left for the last 2 spots. And I'll be honest, I don't really like anybody in the 3K range this week. And even the lower 4K range is kind of depleted with options. So if we just throw in a random 4K guy in here, like we have Josh Downs, Michael Thomas, Kendrick Bourne we talked about. I guess we could plug Bourne in. At least there's $4,300 left for the last spot. Not really seeing too much I like. Like I'm not playing Rico. I'm not playing any of these guys. Pierre Strong, no thank you. Kenneth Walker, I guess, has the chance to miss this game. He did not practice last time I checked. If he happened to miss, we do have Charbonnet there. That would be a viable option, even though the Browns defense has been really tough. So we'll leave this up to interpretation. If you wanted to go the single stack route with Jalen Hurts, just because he's the rushing quarterback, you don't exactly have to have 2 options with him. And we plugged in like a really cheap Trey McBride. That will open up our salary a little bit to where we might actually be able to, like maybe more of a 5K wide receiver that would feel a little bit better. And we did talk about several. If we played Deontay Johnson, then we'd have $5,800 left for the last spot. Gets a little bit better. You could go with Calvin Ridley, Joe Mixon, Jordan Addison. So with rushing quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, you don't have to have 2 pairing options with them. You can do one, but I do usually prefer 2 in single entry builds, but they kind of break the rules a little bit. And like I said in the beginning, or maybe I didn't this time, but I am going to run the optimizer to see who is popping the most as of right now. These are my projections, and it's only Friday, so these could obviously change by the time Sunday rolls around. And I do have randomness on here, so not the exact projections, and I have very minimal stacking options, so don't take these lineups to heart. I just want to see what the projections like as of right now and see if they agree with what we're saying. This will give you guys a good landscape view of the entire slate, because I can't imagine I'm too far off everybody else, so this will give you a good idea of where most people will go and where ownership will lie this weekend. So I had this running while we were talking and looking at the builds here. Yeah, loves Isaiah Pacheco this week. Kendrick Bourne, while I'm okay with him this week, I'm kind of surprised I likes him that much, so maybe I got to tone that down a little bit, but he is one of the better, I think, cheaper options at receiver this week. But Falcons defense a ton. Alvin Kamara, Raheem Mostert, Seahawks. Jalen Hurts looks like the most popular quarterback, my projections, and then I believe we have Lamar Jackson down there coming in second. So it's also liking the spend up quarterback build this week. And with that being the case, you're not going to see a ton of spend up wide receivers. Looks like a lot of mid-range kind of guys like Marquise Brown, Kamara mid-range running back, Isaiah Pacheco, Breece Hall, Zay Flowers, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson. Surprised CMC is that high. If we did limit that exposure, we'd probably get some more expensive options. But as you can see, if I click on Jalen Hurts, it'll show the lineups there, and we should have at least one stacking option with him with the run back guy. So looking at the build on the left, we have Jalen Hurts paired with AJ Brown, and it's ran back with Curtis Samuel. The one below that looks like it's going to be stacked up with Dallas Goedert, ran back with Terry McLaurin, so it does follow the rules there. But looking at the games and teams that it likes the most, KC, New England, which is probably mostly just Kendrick Bourne right there, which that's an insane exposure, so I don't think it'll be that popular. That's just my own personal projection that likes them. Philly, Arizona, Washington, Jacksonville. Those teams will definitely have some ownership. Denver KC game with Isaiah Pacheco there, Mahomes and Kelsey makes a lot of sense. Miami versus New England, Washington versus Philly. So not really too surprised at the players that are populating, and hopefully that gives you a good idea for what to expect on this weekend's slate. With that being said, that's all I got for today's video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like on your way out. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all next time.